Warm welcome, everybody, to the Sephirah Center of Shamanism. My name is Luke, experienced practitioner and mentor of the shamanic and occult sciences. On this channel, we break down all things relating to the ancient shamanic and occult technologies, bringing them into balance with the modern psychology and deep psyche. Today, we're going to be discussing a very controversial spiritual practice, probably the most controversial spiritual practice within the modern world, and that is theistic Satanism. This subject alone may cause some of my viewers and even some of my subscribers to run and hide, purely because of the programming that is around this particular practice as a whole. We're going to be breaking through these illusions. We're going to be shattering the illusions of dogma and duality and looking at what this practice actually is, particularly from a healing and evolutionary standpoint. We're going to be looking at what types of practices can fall under theistic Satanism and what it actually looks like when it comes to one's personal evolution. So if this is something that interests you, particularly for those who are wanting to understand more about this particular practice, then I would highly recommend staying tuned. So before I go into the subject, I'm just going to give a brief overview of my approach to spirituality, purely because since I've been on YouTube, I've been asked by a few people about Satanism in general, particularly, am I a Satanist and is what I do satanic? Probably because I post a lot of videos about negatively polarized spirits, and a lot of my spiritual practice is working with the darker currents, the dark matter energies. Particularly, I think what triggered it was the Channeling Satan video, which I highly recommend watching for clarity on the current of the adversary in general. I will answer that question now and say that I am not a Satanist because I do not identify as a Satanist. However, my practices and what I engage in and my approach to spirituality could very easily fall under the title of theistic Satanism. But the truth is that I feel we should get to a point within our initiatory process where we realize the illusion of these titles in general. And we realize that if we are identifying with a particular title, not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but when we really see the bigger picture, we are really seeing that human beings are so much more than what can be defined by a single title. Human beings are so much more than these titles that are used specifically to encase human potential. And I feel that the practice of theistic Satanism is focused around self-deification, focused around learning how to find divinity from within yourself, learning how to ultimately forge your own path free from the projected oppression of the external world, both internally and externally. So, because a lot of my practices are built towards self-deification and finding God from within the self, that could very easily be seen as a satanic practice. And because I work with darker spirits, one of which is Satanas, Satan himself, who I have found to be an absolutely amazing ally, absolutely amazing guide, extremely approachable, and the go-to spirit for overall shadow integration and initiation. Because I work with these spirits, particularly Satan, as an entity, as a separate divinity, as a particular intelligence, then I could very easily be referred to as a theistic Satanist, purely because theistic Satanism is seeing and actively working with the current of Satan as an intelligence, as a consciousness. Whereas atheistic Satanism, that was developed by Anton LaVey, the author of the Satanic Bible, is what you would class as, atheistic Satanism, which sees Satan more as a reference for the adversary, the reference for rebellion against the oppressive forces of religion, but not working with the specific current of Satan himself. So I will start by saying that I do not identify as a theistic Satanist, but a lot of my practices can very easily be seen as theistic Satanism in general. So I'm going to go into what this practice is really about, because when we think of the term Satan, when we think of the word Satan, it often triggers a lot of fear, unless we are actually familiar with what this current of energy is actually for. And I don't blame anybody for that, first and foremost, purely because we are working and referring to the literal force that has been seen and programmed into us as the force of pure evil itself, the force that we want to avoid, the force that wants to destabilize humanity, destabilize order, and all of these things. Not to mention the sort of, in a lot of Hollywood culture and modern culture, Satanism is very much portrayed in this very scary way of human sacrifices and all of these different things. But the truth is that when we get past all of that plastic, and it is plastic because that is complete illusion and is not what these practices are actually about, we actually delve into a very solid and realistically quite intensive healing and evolutionary process that can be tapped into by working with the current of Satanas, first and foremost. So all practices, whether they are dark or light, have corruption within them. Religion, especially, has corruption within it, purely because of the attachment to righteousness and the refusal of darkness in itself. And if you've watched any of my videos, you will know that if we repress the shadow, then it's ultimately going to work through us and leak through into the world around us, unconsciously without us realizing it. The same goes for the love and light spiritual communities. Attachment to righteousness, attachment to positivity causes more corruption to then leak through into the practice itself, cultivating a more cult-like mindset. And realistically, when we look at Satanism, Satanism is no different to that in any way, shape, or form. We can utilize this practice from a grounded space and use it as a powerful process of evolution and shadow integration, which is what it's meant for. But many people are guided into it from a wounded place. Just like anything else, many people are guided into it because they are angry, because they are wanting to rebel, they're wanting to get their own back on the oppressive forces of the external world. And this is why a lot of satanic practices can sort of get you caught in what I refer to as that outer net of the practice. So we have the practice of Satanism as a whole, which is the path of the adversary, which is ultimately about breaking through your own personal limitations and learning how to forge your own path free of the influence of external constructs and oppression. But there is an outer layer around that. And I feel like that's the same with the occult as well as shamanism, and to be honest, many different practices in regards to spirituality in general. There is this outer layer that sort of addresses the more superficial level of these practices. So once we get through that, we tap into a much deeper reason and a much deeper purpose for these practices as a whole. In regards to Satanism, it's the anger that is created through oppression. That's the outer layer, the anger, the wounding that many people kind of get caught in and then misunderstand what the deeper practice is actually about. Once you actually get beyond that outer net, beyond that superficial anger, beyond that wounding, beyond the purpose that is fueled by trauma, then you actually find a spiritual path that is a hell of a lot more intense than many other spiritual paths. This is a current of energy that is going to challenge you massively. And when you really get into the core of this current of energy, even if you just say invoke Satan and have a conversation with the spirit, have a conversation with the intelligence, you will realize that the spirit does not want to harm you in any way whatsoever, but is going to start, if you are willing and ready to accept this intelligence into your nervous system and into your life, you are going to start to go through a significant process of dissolving who you thought that you were in order to tap into the real potential that exists underneath all of that. So I feel that theistic Satanism is a powerful process of self-deification, and there are many different practices that can fall under theistic Satanism that are very much made for the same thing, which is why, as a spiritual practice, it is very dynamic, combining many different practices from different areas of the occult, taking sort of information from Mesopotamian mythology, taking different pieces of information from Gnosticism and the demiurge and things like that, and basically building it into a very individual and highly personal process of learning how to forge one's own path and learning how to befriend chaos and find God from within the self. You can also see that practice as similar, controversial thing coming in, as similar to shamanism in itself. Shamanism is a practice that is very much built around establishing your connection with the spirit world, working with spirits in reciprocity, and learning how to weaken the veil between your conscious and unconscious mind so that you can effectively exchange insight, information, and energy in general between the spiritual planes and the physical plane of existence. If you're interacting with practices that fall under theistic Satanism, then realistically, we are also playing the role of a type of shaman as well, because we are actively interacting with the current of Satan. What also falls under theistic Satanism is modern demonolatry as well. Modern demonolatry focused specifically around the invocation, not the evocation of demonic entities, merging your consciousness with these forces and learning how to download their knowledge, wisdom, and energy, their blueprint, into your nervous system, into your energy field, and learn how to utilize that individual current of energy to process and heal on a deeper level. So when we are interacting with practices that fall under theistic Satanism, it is anything that is realistically interacting with adversarial forces that are ultimately there to break you through false constructs, break you out of false identities to help you define who you actually are beyond all of that. It is a spiritual practice that is a lot more intense than many others. You do have to let go of a lot more than you would have with other types of practices. For example, the Qliphothic tree, the Dark Kabbalah, which I will make a video about at some point when I'm at a point in my Qliphothic process where I feel I am integrated enough to talk about the different spheres and the different stages of the process. But the Qliphothic initiation in itself can easily be seen as a theistic satanic practice, very, very easily, purely because it is a process of self-deification. It's a process of initiating through the different regions of your personal health structure, breaking through the different layers that are associated with each sphere, and learning how to tap into some of the most repressed, most primal aspects of your own unconscious mind and shadow self. And that doesn't always work directly with the current of Satan, but because it's focused around working with adversarial forces, allowing who you thought you were to simply be consumed by the adversarial forces that dwell within the dark matter, within the primordial chaos, then it can very easily be seen as a practice or an extension of theistic Satanism. Very, very personal journey is this process more than anything. Once we get through that outer layer, once we break through that outer layer of superficial reasonings and trauma-based intentions for going into these practices, then we tap into a very powerful pursuit of self-deification that is going to push you into a place where you are changing constantly. The whole point of working with the current of the adversary is to work with the current of energy that represents the deepest portion of your shadow self. Many people who don't touch satanic practices, many people who still scapegoat satanic practices, are people who claim to be doing shadow integration. But then they hear the word Satan and then they fall straight back into that state of religious scapegoating. This is the most scapegoated practice known to man. But I feel that if we are to really integrate all aspects of our psyche, this is an important concept to get comfy with. If you're wanting to embark on a deep process of shadow integration, it doesn't mean that you have to start engaging with satanic practices. It doesn't mean that you have to start working with the current of the adversary or even working with demonic entities. But what will really help your process of shadow integration is getting comfy with the concept of Satan, getting comfy with the concept of Satan, which is one of the most raw aspects of your shadow self, which does represent the aspects of yourself which have been completely neglected and refused ownership of in order to fit into a patriarchal society that completely represses any aspect of divinity that exists within the self. Satan is known to have planted what we refer to as the flame of godhood, also known as the black flame, which is essentially a spark of primordial chaos that represents basically a spark of chaos that exists within every being. But the idea is that this flame by default has been massively extinguished and the potency of it significantly lowered. But working with such forces is known to ignite this black flame, and in doing so, you will start to see through the illusions of the world that you have been brought up in, and then we'll start to see through the illusions of powerlessness, the illusions of power loss, how you, as a realistically very powerful being, have just completely refused ownership of the potential that does exist within your nervous system, but is completely repressed. So when we talk about the process of igniting the black flame, which is done through various different occult practices that could very easily fall under the category of theistic Satanism, when we really look at that on a deeper level, these practices are focused towards igniting this black flame, which is igniting your connection to your unconscious mind, igniting your connection to your deep unconscious, igniting your connection to some of the deepest, most repressed aspects of your shadow, and more than anything, unlocking the flame of godhood, unlocking your full potential from within your nervous system, which is there, present within your consciousness, there, present within your nervous system, but the whole point is that it's encased, it's frozen. These parts of yourself, these parts of your inner child are frozen in the trauma that has taken place within your past, frozen purely because they have been repressed and refused ownership of, because we've learnt that they don't have a place within the patriarchal society that we have grown up in. So when we talk about igniting the black flame, we are talking about igniting your connection to your shadow self, igniting your connection to the primordial chaos, which is the realm of godhood, which is the realm whereby you are the god, because it's not defined or predefined by anything that has already been constructed by something that exists outside of you in itself. A lot of theistic satanic practices have mentioned they utilize and refer to different mythological stories from Mesopotamian traditions, from Sumerian traditions, and from Gnosticism as well. The two most notable are the demiurge from Gnosticism, the demiurge referring to Yahweh, Yaldabaoth, Jehovah, the false god that is in Gnosticism in control of the human realm, in control of our multiverse, and is responsible for keeping us imprisoned within a re-traumatizing society, in a re-traumatizing multiverse, and then the archons serve the demiurge. The archons are the specific expressions of chaos that are there to keep humanity encased, keep humanity imprisoned. But again, all of this exists within the self. So my approach to theistic Satanism and my approach to these types of practices is that all is within. So the demiurge refers to your ego, and the demiurge is archons refers specifically to the thought forms, the extensions, the beliefs surrounding oppression that are encasing your true divinity. In Sumerian mythology, there's the story of the Enuma Elish. The Enuma Elish referring to the infamous battle that takes place between the primordial deities, the primordial forces, and the generation of gods that later become the Anunnaki. The whole story behind that is that Tiamat and Absu are the primordial dragons that dwell within the nothing space. Their union gives birth to Order. The Order is the first realm of the gods, the first generation of gods. Walking among them is the infamous Enki and Dankina, who give birth to Marduk, who is said to be a type of chosen one to bring deeper levels of creation, deeper levels of order to the cosmos. But that whole story is focused around this state of order that is getting louder and louder and repressing and disturbing the natural flow of nature, which in that story is the primordial chaos. So Absu, Tiamat's partner, gets angry and wants to take them down. Tiamat puts him to sleep, or should I say, I stand corrected, Tiamat tells Enki that Absu is wanting to attack, so Enki puts him to sleep, but then goes a step further and then basically kills Absu, starting a big feud between the forces of Tiamat and the forces of Order that will be led by the son of Enki, Marduk. So, long story short, Order battles chaos. Marduk throws his infamous net over Tiamat, bringing order and restraining the primordial chaos, and then severs Tiamat's body, uses one half of the body to create the heavens and the other half of the body to create the earth, and then uses the blood of the son of Tiamat, which is Kingu, combines it with clay to make human beings to then serve the gods. And this is very similar to the story of Lilith and Samael, where Lilith is banished from the garden, Samael is castrated, and the demiurge, or should I say Jehovah, basically builds and establishes people out of clay that are very much symbolic of people who are detached from their true magical ability. So these types of practices or these types of mythologies show very strongly within different areas of theistic Satanism, and the practice itself is focused around tapping into forces like Tiamat, like Kingu, like Absu, that dwell within the primordial chaos, that have the agenda of pulling you back to the realm of godhood, that have the agenda of igniting that flame of godhood from within your nervous system, from within your body. So a lot of these different mythological stories are used as reference and inspiration for theistic Satanists, and are essentially used as calls back to where we actually come from, calls back to that pure feminine space, which is the primordial chaos that birthed everything. If we refer back to the story of the Enuma Elish with Marduk versus Tiamat, all of that is symbolic of order trying to restrain chaos and refusing ownership of it entirely, then leading to greater sort of oppression of the human race itself, as the human beings are created out of clay and the blood of Kingu to then serve the gods. And the same with the demiurge keeping human beings imprisoned within Gnosticism. All of it is referring to and is very much symbolic of the human need to control. the oppressive nature of those predefined constructs, of those predefined religions, the oppressive nature of our society as a whole, and how to really grow. We need to actually merge with the primordial chaos. We need to merge with our shadow self. And when we do that, particularly through what you could call theistic satanic practices of invoking darker spirits, invoking the satanic current, invoking adversarial forces, then on the microcosmic level, on the individual level, we go through a significant process of dissolving these oppressive forces, going through significant ego dissolution, significant ego death, to the point where we can then reshape our ego into the image of true godhood. But the idea of that is the fact that we are moving back to a reality that is incredibly fluid in nature and isn't predefined. I've heard many people report going through processes such as the Cliffoth or different types of initiatory processes, particularly for those who start working intensely with demonolatry-based practices and invoking darker spirits into their bodies, into their nervous system. Very, very quickly, they start to go through a process of dissolving. Very, very quickly, they start to go through a significant process of ego dissolution and realizing that the way that they have been living their reality is incredibly limited and has already been defined for them by something that is outside of them. So when we really look at theistic Satanism from a very broad perspective, particularly from the perspective of healing and evolution, we are actually tapping into a very extreme process of healing and evolution that you always have a choice how much you interact with it. But the deeper you go into these adversarial currents, the more you're going to have to shed about yourself, the more in your life that you're going to have to let go of. But in doing so, the deeper rewards you are going to be awarded with as well, or rewarded with as well, the deeper rewards you are going to attain for that evolutionary process. Because when you're engaging with the current of the adversary, ultimately what you are doing is that you are making that conscious decision to forge your own path, which is exactly what our multiverse is actually established for. Because we've all come from the primordial chaos and we're born into a physical avatar with free will, we are supposed to forge our own path. We're supposed to find godhood from within the self. We're supposed to tap into our full potential from within the physical body. When we're just following what everybody else is doing, and there is evolution in that, don't get me wrong, but if you are called towards these deeper, darker practices, there is a reason for that, because there is that flame of godhood, that black flame that exists within you, that very literal current of primordial chaos that exists within you, that is trying to bring you back to the source. New Age spirituality is focused towards, oh, we need to go back to the source, merge with source, be at one with source. But acknowledging the fact that source is nothingness. Source is primordial chaos. Source is dark matter energy. So the way back to the source is to go into your shadow. The way back to the source is to go into your own darkness. And within that, you can cultivate your true light. Within that, you can cultivate your true power and potential in a way that is sustainable for your healing and evolutionary path. If we avoid that aspect of ourselves, then the wounds within our unconscious mind, within our nervous system, within our shadow are going to continue to play out within the world around us. And as I said, I'm not saying that you have to be engaging with theistic Satanism based practices to integrate your shadow. But as I said, getting comfy with the concept of the adversary and acknowledging the fact that they are products of your unconscious mind. Don't get me wrong, that's a controversial subject in itself because they are their own beings within the cosmos as well with their own agendas. But because they're dark in nature, they represent aspects of your unconscious mind. And the current of Satan represents the very force that rebels against order, the very force that deconstructs false constructs, regulations, and coping mechanisms so that you can then return to who it is that you're really supposed to be. Theistic Satanism does also differ quite significantly from Luciferianism. However, the practices do have very, very similar philosophies. And I feel the current of Satan and the current of Lucifer, having worked, or am currently working intensively with both of them for my healing and evolutionary path. They do have very different feels to them, but ultimately their goal is the same, and that is self-liberation. Whereas Lucifer is more like a light that shines into your unconscious mind and wants to liberate you. You know, the current of Satan is very similar to that, but is much more around going into the chaos and embracing chaos in order to find who you really are from the source, acknowledging that the black flame, that current of godhood, is the source, and that is your creative potential. In other words, one who is engaging actively with practices that fall under theistic Satanism acknowledge the fact that the shadow is responsible for creating your reality. Acknowledge the fact that your unconscious mind is responsible for giving birth to your reality purely because it is the place that stores your belief systems and patterns. And much like the darkness, much like the dark matter, you are dreaming your reality into existence from the unconscious space. So when you engage with the current of the adversary, you're going to go on a very deep process of shadow integration. And there are initiatory technologies that can take you deeper into that. If you tune into the current itself, Satan himself has access to many path workings and adversarial gateways that are not currently shared in that respect, as well as a pre-existing one such as the Cliff-Off, which is very much built to take you back to Thalmael, very much built to take you back to that place where you are truly realizing that you come from the darkness and you are here to forge your own path free of the projected restriction of the oppressive forces that exist outside of you. So for those who are still alarmed at the idea of theistic Satanism, just remember that every practice has its corruption. Every spiritual practice has an outer layer, the outer layer which is made up of the trauma-based behavioral patterns, the trauma-based intentions. So when you see things like human sacrifices, things like white supremacy, and all of those things, it's all illusionary. Yeah, all of that is coming from a place of wounding within the self, and a lot of satanic practices do have that wounded approach. Yeah, and I do not condone any of that in any way whatsoever. Anything that is operating from that fascist place is coming from internal wounding and repressed anger. And when you get through that illusion, yeah, and break through the illusions of these trauma-based outer layers of these practices, you truly tap into what these practices are really here for, and that is to help you get to know yourself better, to help you get to know yourself in a way that your soul resonates with in this lifetime. In that respect, it's not a path that is for everybody. You know, engaging with these types of forces is not for anybody in any way whatsoever. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely for me. It's my partner who knows a lot about astrology. I don't know anything about astrology, but I know that I'm a 12th house stellium, which is all about the deep unconscious. I've got 4 planets in 12th house, which is all about the deep unconscious mind. So my nervous system is very comfortable with working with adversarial forces, simply because I've very much come here for that purpose. And even though I don't attach myself to a particular spiritual title or anything like that, I do acknowledge that my responsibility within this lifetime is to share these teachings and act as a bridge between what has been deemed as acceptable and what has been deemed as unacceptable. So the people working with me and are on my mentoring programs and in my membership programs are people that are focused specifically towards integrating the deeper, darker aspects of themselves that they have deemed as not acceptable and that they have scapegoated and separated themselves from through the oppressive forces, and bringing those into balance with the things that they are comfortable with, finding the equilibrium that is between them. Okay, so a lot of my approach to spirituality is focused on, you could say, left-hand path practices, which is about forging one's own path. But I do also believe that aspects of order are necessary as well, as we are living within a physical body, and without some form of order, we would not be able to effectively separate ourselves from source, have free will, and then get to know ourselves in a way that works for us. But working with adversarial forces are extremely helpful for helping you to really see past those illusions, see past those constructs, and gain gnosis and insight into what your path is really supposed to be. So, extremely powerful spiritual practice is theistic Satanism. Okay, very, very powerful, very, very profound. Once you get through that initial wounding, that realistically exists within every spiritual practice. Okay, so I think that is just about everything that I needed to speak about in today's video. If you have any questions and you need any support with tapping into these forces, or if you want to establish a strong foundation with a trauma focus, then check out my mentoring programs and my membership program. But for now, thank you guys. I appreciate you. Like and subscribe if this content was valuable to you, and I will see you in the next video.